Oh, hello. Welcome to class. Yes, you're just in time, as always. So I say we get right into it, okay? For today's class, we're going to be learning about Snom. Snom. I have brought my own Snom, as you can see, which I got some time ago in the Galar region's wild area, and he's kind of stuck with me since then. Now, Snom is an ice and bug Pokemon, and you know what? Snom, and obviously its evolution, are actually the only ice and bug Pokemon that are known to date. And I think this is just one of the many cool things that makes Snom really unique. And we will go through some more in a bit. First, do you know what kind of Pokemon Snom is known as? It is known as the worm Pokemon. The worm Pokemon. And you might think maybe Caterpie or Wurmple were known as the worm Pokemon. And you're also correct. All three of those actually share that name, which honestly makes sense to me because all three of them are worms. Now, looking at Snom, we can see that it is a very, very small Pokemon. Your first reaction might be that it looks a bit like a snowball with little spiky spikes coming out of it. But there's so much more to Snom. So I think first we're going to look at Snom's biology. Okay? And then we'll explain what each part of Snom does, or what it's used for, and all that stuff. Okay? Perfect. So, as you can see, Snom has a bunch of translucent ice spikes on its back. Spikes everywhere. And these act as a protective layer against predators. Next, if we see its sweet face, you can see that Snom has 1 and 2 black eyes. And this right here is its mouth. It is very soft and round. And, with this small mouth, you might wonder, what does Snom eat? It doesn't have any teeth or any sort of, power in its mouth. Well, Snoms usually eat snow. Yes, snow. For example, snow that has piled up on the ground. That is also why I always keep a fresh supply of homemade snow at home. In that sense, he's very easy to take care of. And yes, I am aware, that the word Snom and the word snow are very similar. So, bear with me, okay? I hope I don't mistake one for the other. So, speaking of eating snow, Snoms usually will climb their way up mountains whilst eating snow. So, okay, it's eating all of this snow. Why does it do that, just to eat? Obviously, that is a reason, a Pokemon has to eat. But Snom's organs are really interesting. I believe you will learn about it more if you go on to study Ice-type Pokemon or Pokemon biology. But essentially, Snow's organs amplify the cold air from the snow that they eat, and they use it to create the spikes that they have on their back. So they eat the snow and they use that to create their spiky spikes that they have on their back. Typically, the more snow a Snom eats, the larger the spikes on its back grow. Although they do not grow to ridiculous sizes, This one here is usually standard size for how big Snom's spikes get, and they don't really get much larger than these ones. Now, Snoms are usually quite big eaters, so they eat a lot of snow, which is kind of funny since, they are so small. But it's also something that is common in larval Pokemon, because they need to eat a lot in order to evolve. However, for Snom, snow is not only for eating. When Snom is startled, it can easily burrow into the snow in order to hide itself, camouflaging in the snow as well. Now, let's move on to Snom as a battler, as a fighter, okay? So, the first point, Snom is not a battler. The end. Snom is not a fighter. The end. No, okay, I'm just kidding. Snom is, however, a relatively weak Pokemon. So much that it actually has the lowest base stat total of all the Ice-type Pokemon. That means that if you add a Pokemon's HP, attack, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed, you add them all up, Snom will give you the lowest number amongst all Ice-type Pokemon. They also have the lowest HP and lowest speed of all Ice-type Pokemon, and also the lowest special defense, tied just with Swinub. So, it's no wonder that if 3 of its base stats are the lowest amongst Ice types, the total base stats are bound to be the lowest too. A really interesting fact about Snom is that Snom is the only Ice-type Pokemon that cannot learn the move Blizzard. The only Ice-type Pokemon. Every single other Ice-type Pokemon known to date can learn the move Blizzard. Every single one. Secondly, also a lot of non-Ice-type Pokemon can learn it too, but not Snom. In fact, here is a list of Pokemon that can learn Blizzard. And remember that Snom cannot learn Blizzard, but these Pokemon can. Swinub, Snorunt, Spheal. Oh, okay, but those are Ice types. Okay, are you ready? Wooper and Squirtle can learn the move Blizzard as well. That's not good enough, okay? Rattata. Yes, Rattata can learn Blizzard. Cubone can learn Blizzard. And lastly, Azurill can learn Blizzard. Azurill is literally a baby. What do you mean they can learn Blizzard? And yet, poor little Snom cannot learn them. Cannot learn it. But I love him regardless. I just think it's kind of funny and also interesting that all these Pokemon can learn way stronger Ice-type moves than an actual Ice-type Pokemon. Speaking of moves though, Snom can only learn 2 moves naturally. Those being Powder Snow and Struggle Bug. And as you can see, this one Struggle Bugged a little bit too hard on my finger. And it just goes to show that even the weakest Pokemon can still do damage. Now it can also learn a few TMs, but I think it's better that we wait for its evolution before going through those moves, since its evolution does get a lot more. So, speaking of the evolution, before we move on to Snom's evolution, I have a fun question I would like to ask you. So, as you might guess, Snom is actually the smallest Ice-type Pokemon, and it is actually tied for the smallest with 2 others. Do you want to guess which ones? Honestly, it is a very sneaky question, and it's sort of a trick question too, so I'll be very surprised if you know either of the 2, just like that. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to think about it, but don't worry if you cannot get it, okay? It is not anything that will come up in any test. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and time. So, the same size as Snom. Bit of a trick. And I think the other one is even trickier. It is actually Rotom in its frost form. And you might be thinking, isn't that a lot bigger? Right? It's like a big fridge kind of thing. The thing is, all Rotom forms are listed as the same size. So, although you might look at Frost Rotom and think that it is a fridge, so it will be bigger, it is officially listed as the same height as Rotom. So think about it as a mini fridge. Anyway, that was it. Again, you will not need to know this. I just thought it was a fun sort of trick question that you could maybe show off to your friends. I don't know. So, any other questions about Snom before we move on to its evolution? Yes, so Snom and its evolutions are the only ice and bug type Pokemon, at least that we know of so far. What type does that make them weak to? Okay, let's look at it very quickly, since I know eventually you'll have to do your type matchups exam. So, Snom is weak to flying and steel type moves. And unfortunately, both of its types, ice and bug, are both weak to rock and fire. So it is doubly weak to those moves, meaning that instead of taking double damage from rock and fire type moves, Snom unfortunately takes quadruple damage from them. So definitely keep your Snom away from any rocks and any fire. Okay, let's move on. Yes, perfect. So, when Snom has a very strong friendship with its trainer, and when it is leveled up during the night, it will evolve into Frostmoth, the Frost Moth Pokemon. So, Frostmoth is a white moth-like Pokemon. Its body is quite round, with the upper part of it being thicker, resembling a scarf to get cozy in the cold weather where it usually lives. But these are actually its arms, which it usually keeps crossed to stay warm. It has blue eyes with long eyelashes, and in between its eyes is a very small blue jewel, and above it 2 grey and long antennae come out of it. These antennae are used to detect currents in the air. Frostmoth, as you can see, has 2 very large and beautiful wings, which it uses to move around, as you know, most Pokemon with wings tend to do. The icy scales that come from Frostmoth's wings, when it flutters them, can actually fall while Frostmoth is flying around, and they are said to fall resembling snow, which I think is pretty cool. Now, these wings, however, are extremely cold to the touch, and I would strongly recommend not touching them, essentially. Frostmoths are Pokemon that are quite protective of their territory. Probably, since they grew up being a Snom and eating so much snow from these areas, if anyone damages their territory, Frostmoths will show no mercy and fly around, creating blizzards in order to stop whoever is damaging their area. And yes, of course, now it finally does learn the move Blizzard. And I believe that is everything for now. Do you have any questions before we look at its moves and abilities? I promise I will be quick with the moves and abilities, okay? How big is Frostmoth? That's a very good question. So, it's interesting because obviously Snom is so small, right? But Frostmoth is a lot bigger. It grows to around 1.3 meters tall, or just over 4 feet, which is obviously a lot bigger than a tiny little Snom over here. So, I think we go look at its moves now, okay? So, unlike little Snom here, Frostmoth actually learns a lot more moves, like you would expect from a fully evolved Icy Wind upon evolving, and can learn a lot of ice and bug type moves such as Blizzard, like we said, and also Bug Buzz. It can also learn a lot of moves via TM, such as Swift, Hurricane, Dazzling Gleam, and Icicle Spear, just to name a few, so it gets a bit more variety in types of moves. And that's it for the moves. See, very, very quick, as I said. Now, let's look at its abilities, because they are also quite interesting. Snom and Frostmoth, they both get the two same abilities. The first one is Shield Dust. Now, this is an ability that only some bug Pokemon get, so it's quite exclusive in that sense. What this ability does is that it makes it so the Pokemon that has this ability is not affected by the additional effects of damaging moves. So for example, it means that Snom in this case, or the Pokemon that has Shield Dust as an ability, cannot be burnt by Flamethrower or flinched by Fake Out, just to name some examples. This, however, is only for damaging moves. It does not work for moves that do no damage, such as Thunder Wave. However, this ability may be exclusive, but Snom and Frostmoth actually have one hidden ability which is unique to them, so only Snom and Frostmoth can learn it. So, this ability is called Ice Scales. Ice Scales. Ice Scales makes it so that the Pokemon that has the ability takes half of the amount of damage from special moves. So for example, if a special move, such as for example Thunderbolt, would do 100 points of damage to a Snom or a Frostmoth, this move will only do 50 damage, since the ice scales reduce half of that damage. However, this only works for special moves, and physical moves will still do the same amount of damage. So pretty cool, pretty exclusive ability, and a pretty strong one. I feel like it'd be pretty strong if a really strong Pokemon got that. So, what do you think? What do you think of Snom and Frostmoth? If I had to take something away from this lesson, is that no matter how small or weak you are, if you keep going, if you keep persevering, you are bound to achieve whatever you want. Even Snom, who is the smallest and weakest of all Ice-type Pokemon, can get stronger and even, fly once it has worked hard enough. So, you can achieve your goal too. So believe in yourself and go for it, okay? Thank you very much for coming to today's class. Let me know which Pokemon you would like to learn about next. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Say bye, Snom. Bye bye.